We often think of space as a place we go to escape Earth, to leave gravity behind, to leave limits behind. But space has taught us something far less romantic and far more useful. We don't go to space to escape our problems here on Earth. We go because space applies the pressure that forces us to solve them. And one of the most important problems that it's forced us to confront is the one closest to home: the human body itself and how deeply it belongs to this planet. When astronauts go up into orbit, nothing dramatic happens at first. No alarms, no sudden failures, but slowly, the body begins to reveal what it depends on. Fluids shift upwards. Blood that gravity usually pulls down towards the legs redistributes towards the chest and head. Faces become puffy. Legs become thinner. Not because anything isn't working, but because gravity is no longer quietly doing that work for us. Bones begin to change too. We tend to think of bones as rigid structures, but they're not. They're sensors. And they constantly remodel themselves in response to load. Take gravity away, and the message sent to bones is clear. These structures are no longer required. Bone loss in space isn't a malfunction. It's a logical response to a missing signal. The same is true for balance. Our inner ears evolved under the assumption that gravity would always point in one direction. In space, that assumption fails, and the brain has to relearn what up even means. These systems still work, but they work differently. And that distinction matters. Nothing is broken. The human body is simply revealing how much of normal physiology depends on gravity doing invisible work for us. And so, space doesn't break the human body. It simply removes it from the environment it was designed for. By taking gravity away, spaceflight strips human biology back to its first principles, to what the body needs, what it can adapt to, and what it cannot tolerate with. And in space, there is no margin for getting this wrong. Space medicine is shaped by one unavoidable fact: that help is very far away. On the International Space Station, there is no emergency department down the road. There is no specialist on call. There is no spare hospital bed. As human missions move further and further away from Earth, these constraints only increase. In space, you can't afford to wait for symptoms. You can't afford to get ill. And you definitely can't afford to get injured. And so, space medicine has to think differently. Instead of asking, how do we treat disease? Space medicine asks, how do we stop it from developing at all? And this is where space reveals something uncomfortable about life on Earth. Earth is a remarkably forgiving environment. Gravity is constant. Oxygen is abundant. Food is accessible. And help is often nearby. Because of this, we can tolerate a surprising amount of neglect, of sleep, of stress, of movement, of recovery, and still function, often for years. And that forgiveness shapes our behavior. It allows small compromises with biology to accumulate over time. We sit for long periods. We sleep for less than we should. And we accept chronic stress as a part of daily life. And because nothing breaks immediately, we assume the system is coping. Space doesn't offer this margin. In space, small physiological changes are tracked continuously. Early muscle wasting, subtle bone loss, changes in attention or mood, shifts in sleep patterns. Because in an unforgiving environment, small changes don't stay small for long. There is no question of whether risk is accumulating. There is only the question of whether the body is failing. On Earth, we often treat the body as if it has unlimited reserves. We wait for pain, abnormal blood test results, or loss of function before we act. Illness becomes a trigger point for care rather than the end point of a long process. In space, illness represents a failure in anticipation, because space medicine is built around reducing risk before it accumulates, through environment, routine, and continuous feedback, because there is no margin for neglect. And this contrast forces a difficult question. What if illness isn't the beginning of disease, but the final stage of ignoring biology? Everything we've learned about humans in space has taught us to confront one simple idea: that health isn't just something that happens inside of us. It's something shaped continuously by the environment around us. And space medicine makes this impossible to ignore. Where gravity disappears, bones weaken. Where movement is limited, muscles waste. And where isolation increases, cognition and mood suffer. These aren't space problems. They're human problems. These are the patients that doctors see every day. The elderly person who lost their independence in a fall that was years in the making. The 40-year-old whose diagnosis came years too early. And the worker who reached burnout long after the warning signs were clear. Not sudden failures, but long, quiet, preventable declines. We see the same patterns all around us. In aging, in long hospital stays, in intensive care units, and in work cultures that promote immobility, chronic stress, and sleep deprivation. In each case, we do the same thing. We respond to the consequences. We prescribe medication for bone loss after it's already occurred. We rehabilitate muscle once it's already wasted away. And we address burnout when people are already exhausted. Space medicine suggests a different approach. Because in space, the body isn't treated as something to be fixed. It's treated as something to be supported. And this leads to a very different definition of healthcare. Healthcare isn't just about fixing humans. It's about designing environments they can survive in. And so, space medicine doesn't teach us how to live off Earth. It teaches us how to live on it. So why haven't we changed? It isn't ignorance. The science of prevention isn't new. The honest truth is that traditional healthcare was built for a fundamentally different problem. Historically, the most important burden of disease was acute illness. Infections, accidents, emergencies, conditions that arise suddenly and demand immediate intervention. That system saved and continues to save countless lives. But today, the fundamental nature of disease has shifted. Today, the most important burden of disease is chronic. Conditions that arise slowly, silently, over the years. And a system designed to respond to crises is poorly equipped to prevent one. Space medicine escapes this not through superior wisdom, but through necessity. Because when there is no margin for neglect, you're forced to build differently from the beginning. That is the honest truth, and the harder one. Trying to change systems that have served us well and carry enormous momentum is genuinely difficult. But difficulty is not the same as impossibility. And the price of not changing is one that we're already paying. So what would it mean to change? If we took these ideas seriously here on Earth, healthcare would change in 3 fundamental ways. Firstly, we would start tracking health as a direction, not as damage. We would stop waiting for diagnosis, but instead start tracking patterns over time. Stress, movement, fatigue, and intervening when those trajectories begin to drift. Care guided by momentum, not by crisis. Secondly, we would start designing environments that actively support biology. Schools, workplaces, cities are not backgrounds to someone's health. They're physiological forces. And what shapes us isn't just physical, it's psychological and social too. All of our environments should be designed with all of this in mind. Because the environments that we place people in are not backdrops to someone's health. They're determinants of it. And finally, prevention would become a central discipline of medicine, not an afterthought. Reducing risk before it accumulates, maintaining function before it's lost, acting before the body has to send a signal that we can't ignore. Because decline is not random. It follows patterns. And when you understand those patterns, you can act before breakdown begins. And the consequences of this are not limited to the individual. They ripple throughout the system. Every illness prevented is a GP appointment that doesn't need to happen. Every fracture avoided is a surgical waiting list that gets shorter. Every burnout caught early is an A&E admission that doesn't occur. We're overwhelmed not because of a lack of resources, but because we keep arriving too late. Shift medicine upstream, and the pressure downstream begins to ease. And this is why space medicine isn't futuristic medicine. It's medicine stripped back to its first principles, to what the body needs, what it can adapt to, and what it cannot negotiate with. And those insights don't stay in orbit. They return with us. That's why investing in space and pushing forward the boundaries of science has always yielded returns far greater than just rockets or satellites. It sharpens our understanding of life itself. Space doesn't show us how to escape Earth. It shows us how to take better care of the people who never will. Thank you.